Hello, Ben. Thank you for coming in today. I just want to discuss your test results that we found from the gel electrophoresis lab. I'll be your Dr. Fabian Diaz. Thank you. So coming up first, we isolate the DNA that we got from your sample that you gave to us. And we believed it had cystic fibrosis. So if we look at this gel electrophoresis results, we were able to see the DNA ladder, the control sample, and both the female and male patient samples from you and your wife. If you take a look on the left, you'll be able to see these huge numbers like 400 BPS. All that means is the base pairs that were in the DNA and in the gene, for example, in this case, it had 400 base pairs because cystic fibrosis has that gene and that amount of base pairs within it. The DNA ladder will tell us the landmarks of where our DNA is. The control sample will tell us what our DNA is and like what we're looking at and basing it off of. And then to the right of those, we have the test samples from you and your wife. So right now it displays 3 bands at 400 base pairs, 298 base pairs, and 102 base pairs. And that means there was a cut and both parents are carriers of cystic fibrosis. And this most likely means that your child will be a carrier, if not be affected. I'm very sorry to tell you that. Before we assume anything, let's dive further into this really quick. So cystic fibrosis is a genetic disease which infects the lungs and it will limit your ability to breathe. And the protein that's responsible for this is the cystic fibrosis transmembrane conductance regulator. It's a very long word, but most people just call it CFTR. And typically this protein will transfer chloride out of the cells to regulate the amount of water within organs. And when this mutation occurs in the protein, the chloride will not be able to transport that water out anymore of the cell. And that will result in more mucus and then in an overall thicker and heavier organ line and water cells. In a normal gene, if you take a look here, we can see that it looks pretty normal, but the highlighted parts are where the gene is mutated at. So if you look at the mutated gene, those parts are flipped and they are changed, which would result in cystic fibrosis. And symptoms will typically include persistent coughing, shortness of breath, pneumonia, perhaps salty sweat and taste, even complications in gaining weight and height growth. These are all common symptoms of cystic fibrosis. If you want to take a look, just look at the pictures to your right, and those should give you a visual of what I am talking about. DNA, if you would want to know, is a unique genetic information which each human carries and is unique to themselves. So that's why we're different. That's why I have different facial features, different hair, and you're perhaps a girl. So these are all just genetic things, and long hair, all those play a role in DNA, and DNA plays a role in those. DNA is that complex double helix figure, which you can see up on the top. And it has 4 base pairs, which you went through with the gel electrophoresis lab. There's adenine, guanine, thymine, cytosine, and they pair up with AT and GNC. Proteins are the living parts of organisms, and they're consisted of amino acids and peptide bonds, which will bond those amino acids together to create that protein. And proteins serve many, many purposes, like repairing the body, creating organs, and even helping a child develop into their teenage years or adult life. To create a protein, it's going to be in the ribosome. The ribosome will then attach the amino acids together using the peptide bonds, and that will create a protein. And this is called translation. So, in order for you to pass on this disorder to your children, both parents would have to be carriers, and in this case, both parents are carriers. So since cystic fibrosis is a recessive gene, that means both parents will have to have that recessive gene. Therefore, they're carriers. There's two types of alleles, and alleles are variations of genes which you can inherit by both parents, and they can be either dominant or recessive. Dominant will mask over another trait which is recessive, and recessive will be masked by dominant traits. This can include like brown eyes or darker hair compared to blonde or blue hair. And if you take a look at your family pedigree really quick, we can see that your grandparents were carriers or unaffected by this trait, and from both sides of the family, it was passed on to the father and the mother, and they became carriers. Since they were carriers to recessive disease, this gave it to the son, which has a 25% chance of getting it, a 50% chance of being a carrier, and a 25% chance of not getting it at all. So it will be undetermined until the child is birthed, but for now, he still has a strong chance of being a carrier and not affected. One tool we use is CRISPR, and it's a precise piece of technology which is able to repair and add new genes and eradicate any mutations in the body. At the moment, we are able to treat cystic fibrosis with CRISPR and correct that gene in the human stem cells by replacing that gene completely with better and more healthy pieces of DNA in that gene. And if you take a look to the top right, with that CRISPR picture, you can see how CRISPR actually works by taking out that DNA and replacing it. In the future, your child should live a pretty normal life. People with cystic fibrosis usually live from like 40 to 70 years old, which is fairly old. And at the moment, there are treatment options like penicillin, cough medicine, antibiotics, oxygen therapy, or even lung transplants, which can greatly improve the child's life. Yeah, thank you for coming in today. I want to begin by saying thank you for coming in, and let's get through these gel electrophoresis results. I have great news. It does appear that you both are unaffected by this trait that we were looking for called albinism. And in this case, if we look at the numbers to the left, we are able to tell that it was cut at the 170 marks. And if it was cut there, that means that there was no mutation whatsoever. And both of you were cut at these specific locations, which means that neither of you have the mutation. And that will not be passed on to your kid, so he will be safe or she will be safe. Albinism is a genetic mutation where the body is unable to produce melanin, and it will cause pale pigmentations in the hair, skins, and eyes. Melanocytes is a type of skin cell, and that creates proteins called tyrosine, or TYR, and that job is to produce melanin, which will darken our skin tone and give us eye color and hair color. And when a mutation occurs in this gene, the protein will no longer be able to produce melanin, and this will result in the person looking pale, which leads to albino. The normal gene, as you can tell, is right there, and when mutated, look at the highlighted segments, and it will be where the gene is changed and is no longer to produce that melanin. And if you look to the right, there is a picture of the melanocyte cell. The symptoms are just paler skin, sensitivity to light, rapid eye movement, vision problems, and cross-eyed. The biggest change we'll ever see with people with albinism is the great difference in color of the skin and their hair color, just because it's usually so pale that it's very easy to distinguish against. And it's not too serious to the body, it's just a pale color to the skin and slight eye issues. So DNA is unique and it's passed down through your family, and it's genetic information which is unique to each and every individual on the planet. It's created by small molecules called nucleotides, and they base together in a double helix shape. And these nucleotides are just tiny molecules, and there are four of them called adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine, and they base together with AT and GNC. And there's also proteins, which are created by amino acids and peptide bonds, and these are created in the ribosome. And there are so many different types of proteins, but in albinism, the protein called TYR is affected. And in this case, to inherit the disorder, both parents would have to be recessive, as it is a recessive disorder. And since you both are not carrying this disorder, your child will not have it. It appears on chromosome 11 when the genetic disorder does occur. And it is a recessive gene. And there's two types of alleles. Alleles are different variations of genes which are inherited by both parents. And the two types are dominant and recessive. Dominant is when a trait will mask over another, like dark hair or dark eye color. And recessive alleles are when a trait is masked by a more dominant allele, like blue eyes are being dominated by brown eyes. And albinism is a recessive gene. If you take a look at your pedigree, we can see that from the mom's side, there was no traits of albinism, but on the dad's side, the grandma was a carrier, but it was not passed down to the dad. Therefore, when you two had children, or will have children, they will not come out with the trait. CRISPR is a really nice piece of technology that is recently found, and it helps add genes and eradicate bad genes and any mutations in the body. But at the moment, CRISPR is unable to effectively treat albinism. But in the future, gene therapy will be an option for treating this disorder. Gene therapy is a method of treating disorders by inserting its own DNA instructions into the body, and those instructions will code for better and new genes, which will effectively treat the disorder. In the future, if the kid does have albinism, he will live a completely normal life. There's no difference other than the pale skin, and treatments will include sunblock or sunglasses, contacts, or protective clothing to protect from the sun. That's it.